going on, everybody? Oh, let's see here. Oh, I'm on the homework. That's not the lesson. There we go. So, these I do not believe are in iTunes because I was having issues uploading to iTunes this morning. I tried going in once again earlier, but there was still issues. Sierra, I'm actually going to make today's lesson pretty quick. I'm only going to do what you see on the screen right now. That's all I'm doing for today because of how beautiful it is outside. So, I just got to show you guys three new trig functions. And I have to. Why did I write it like that? I just noticed that I have some issues, but I'll have you guys fix it in a second. But I'm going to show you guys three new trig functions, and I'm going to show you guys how to solve with them, both by hand and with the calculator. So yeah, we're just going to do the top part, those two exercises. Exercise 3, 4, 5, and 6 will all be tomorrow because, like, two of those four questions we'll be able to pretty much do in seconds after you guys learn what the new trig functions are. So I think we're going to be okay overall. So first thing, I need you guys to fix something because I just noticed I have an error and I don't know why I have this error. So the first function is secant, so that is represented as sec theta. The second one is cosecant, but it's not represented as cos because we know that's cosine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross off the cos part, and what I would like you guys to do is write in CSC. That stands for cosecant. That's the abbreviation for it. And then the very last one says that it's cotangent, and I wrote down tan. So this tan is not supposed to be here. This is actually supposed to say COT for cotangent. So these are known as our reciprocal trig functions. Okay? So when we do a reciprocal trig function, it's essentially a fraction being flipped over. So before we get there, I just got to write a few things down for you. The first thing I'm going to write down is for secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So underneath, actually I'll write it right next to it. So secant theta is the reciprocal of cosine. That just means that if you were to take cosine and flip it over, if you were to take cosine and flip it over, that is the same thing as secant. And what the math people did back in the past is rather than having you guys write it as fractions, they just created a whole new trig term. Cosecant is always going to be the reciprocal of sine. So for this one, it's just sine being flipped over. And the last one is cotangent, and cotangent is just tangent being flipped over. So everything that I'm going to show you guys today is pretty much going to be the same thing that we've done in the past, but it's going to be flipped over because these are going to be known as reciprocals. So it's not going to be anything too crazy, I don't think, but it's kind of going back with a refresher with these because we have been doing everything on graphs, and we're going to go back to doing the rotations on the x and y axis. So the only other thing that I have to, I'll just go down and I'll look at exercise number 1. I'm going to go down to part A. So I'm first going to show you guys how to do all these without a calculator. So I'm going to do everything by hand. And then in exercise number 2, I'm going to show you guys how to do it with the calculator, and then we should be good to go for today. All right. So as far as agos, we have secant of 60 degrees. So I'm going to go back to the old school. I say old school, but it's going to be the beginning of this unit where we graphed the degrees. So we just have to make sure we know what quadrant 60 degrees is in. And we know 60 degrees should be in that first quadrant. So I have my terminating ray. We started here on the x-axis, and we know that this is 60 degrees. So when we did these back at the beginning of the unit, after you guys put in your angle, I told you guys you needed to create a right triangle. So I'm just going to create my right triangle. And you may or may not still have these triangles remembered, but this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So if you have them memorized, awesome. If you do not, I'll write them down again for you guys. But 30 degrees across from 30 is going to represent 1/2. Across from 60 is radical 3 over 2. And the hypotenuse, because we talked about the unit circle earlier in this unit, the hypotenuse is always 1. So it's been a bit, I know. But now that we have that, it says that we need to find secant. Well, secant is not something that we actually know off the top of our head. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top, and I'm going to show you guys something else that we've done, and it's going to probably make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to scroll up, and secant was right above us, right? So I said secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So it's cosine flipped upside down. So this is what I'm going to do. Off to the side, I'm going to write cos theta. And you guys may recall, we did it in geometry last year. I retaught it to you guys this year. But there was that SOHCAHTOA, the Silver Creek teachers, talking about, I think it was the horses. I can never remember how Miss Randolph taught it to you guys last year. But cosine was represented by a fraction because you guys were taught, oh, come on, iPad. My iPad's freezing up on me. All right, here we go. You guys were taught the Silver Creek teachers, and then it was like, I'm just going to write it all down, the SOHCAHTOA. And cosine represented A over H. So because secant is the reciprocal function, that means when we want to change it into secant form, what it means is we're just going to take the fraction and we're just going to flip it over because it is reciprocal. Oscar had a heap of apples. I knew it was something. I couldn't remember if you guys were taught the horses or not. So notice secant got flipped over because it is the reciprocal function of cosine. So now I'm going to come down here, and now I have my triangle. Since we're looking for the secant of 60 degrees, we are trying to find the hypotenuse over the adjacent. So it's just like what we did before. So in this case, the hypotenuse is 1. And then we have our adjacent, which is 1/2. Okay. Well, this is kind of like what we had before. You have a whole number over a fraction. We don't want to have fractions on the bottom. There's another way to get this answer, and I'm going to get there. I'm just showing you guys the long way first so you guys see where these numbers are coming from. So I'm going to put the top is 1 over 1, and the bottom's going to be 1/2. And when you guys go to do this, you guys had to multiply by your LCD. And we've been doing a lot of practice with these. In this case, our LCD is going to be 2. So if I multiply the top by 2, 1 over 1 times 2 is just going to be 2. And if you multiply the bottom, 1/2 times 2 is just going to be 1. So the secant of 60 degrees is just going to be an answer of 2. So I was showing it based on how we've been doing it the last couple of days. But the other thing that I want you guys to recognize, and we talked about this way back at the beginning of the unit, cosine represented a variable. Cosine is always going to represent your x value. So if you look at your triangle, notice that your x value inside your triangle, the one that's going sideways, is 1/2. So cosine is 1/2. Well, now that we know this is 1/2, we said that the secant is just the reciprocal. So rather than doing all this work with the LCD, what we could really do is just take this fraction and flip it over, and we have our final solution. So I'll show you that little shortcut again in part B to show you guys we don't have to create the fraction, we don't have to do an LCD, we don't have to multiply it out. We just have to figure out if we're doing the x value or the y value. Okay? So I'm actually going to jump to C first, and then I'm going to come back and do B. Because C is cosecant, and that was the second one that I did at the top of the page. So I'm going to come over here to C. Now the only difference between A and C is actually in radian mode. And when we go to graph things, it's preferred that we do it in degrees. So again, some of you guys may remember this. This was back in like lesson 4, I think. But in order to convert something into degrees, we would have to multiply it by something. And in this case, since we're changing it to degrees, it would be 180 over pi. This is not something that you have to memorize. It's given to you. So if you don't have it remembered, it's okay. And then what we did here is we did cross reducing or multiplied straight across. So I can cross reduce. I know I have a pi on top and a pi on the bottom. 4 and 180, I know I can divide them by 2, but I believe I could divide both of them by 4. If I were to do 180 divided by 4, oops, the 4 would cancel out and become a 1, and I believe the 180 would cancel out and become a 45. Because if you do 45 and 45 is 90, and then 2 more 45s would give you another 90. So now if I multiply straight across, I just have 3 times 45. 3 times 5 is 15. If I carry the 1, it should be 135. Thank you, Sierra. So I have 135 degrees. So now I can actually solve this out. This is cosecant of 135. So, just like I did in the last one, someone's at my front door. My phone's going crazy. So I have 135 degrees. This time 135. Again, we're going to start at the x-axis. It's going to end in the second quadrant this time. So that's 135. But we have to create the right triangle. So let me zoom in here. If I go to do my right triangle, I'm going to end here. But I need to know this angle on the inside. So in order to find the angle on the inside, we got to remember we connected to the x-axis. And on the other side, on the x-axis, this is 180 degrees. So in order to find the angle on the inside, we have to subtract them. And 180 minus 135 is going to give us 45 degrees. So that's 45. The top will be 45 because this will be a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So again, I don't know if you guys have these triangles memorized. I'm going to write it down for you again. The 45s were radical 2 over 2, radical 2 over 2, and the hypotenuse is 1. Okay? So I'm going to do this as a shortcut trick with you guys. I'm going to write out this part underneath the cosecant. I'll show you the shortcut, and then we'll be done with that. So cosecant is actually the reciprocal of sine. And we know that sine theta is represented by opposite over hypotenuse. So if cosecant is the reciprocal, when I go to make the switch, all I'm going to do is flip the O and the H upside down. So we can do it that long way, and we can do the LCD, but there's an easier way. There is a shortcut. And what you guys can do is you can just look at the original sign. So if cosine is represented as the x value, then sine is really just going to be the y value. So what I'm going to do here, we'll zoom in just a little bit so you guys can still see the top and the bottom. I'm going to look at that right triangle I drew, and I'm just going to highlight the y value in this case, which is going to be radical 2 over 2. Except that is the sine value. So in order to find cosecant, which is what this question is asking for, you're going to have to do the reciprocal. So if we do the reciprocal and flip it upside down, it's going to be 2 over radical 2. The only thing going on with this is when you guys do math, you're not allowed to have radicals on the bottom. So I just have to make sure that I multiply top and bottom by radical 2 to get rid of that radical. So I'm going to multiply the bottom by radical 2. I'm going to multiply the top by radical 2. My iPad froze again. Stop freezing. It's just notability. I'm going up to the school later this week, so I'll see if I can try to update it at the school and see if it will fix the issue. So now I'm going to multiply it. 2 times radical 2 is really just going to be 2 radical 2. And then radical 2 times radical 2 is just going to be positive 2. And technically that could be reduced down one more time because the 2's on the outside would cancel out. And radical 2 would be the reciprocal for that radical 2 over 2. Okay? So there's only one other one I have to show you guys. It's cotangent, and then I'm just going to show you guys how you can type it in the calculator and find the answer almost every time. Unfortunately, the calculator will only show you an estimated value. It won't show an exact value. So when you go to look at your homework, you'll have to make sure you're reading the question carefully. If it says find exact value, you have to solve it like we just did in these two problems and how I'm going to show you in part B. So if we go to cotangent, I'm going to write down the little rules up top first. Cotangent is the reciprocal for tangent. And we know tangent is represented by opposite over adjacent. So that means if you guys were to go to do cotangent, that means it's going to be represented by adjacent over hypotenuse. I don't know why I just put a theta there, but it would be adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent over opposite. Opposite. Opposite starts with the letter O. See, I'm okay. So, I'm just going to graph this. I have cotangent of 150. Once again, we have 150 degrees, which is going to fall in the second quadrant. So I'm starting on the x-axis. I'm coming all the way over here to the second quadrant. This is 150 degrees. But what we need to do is we have to find the right triangle. Well, if you guys go to do the right triangle, very similar to what we just did in part C, we have to subtract that 150 from 180 degrees, and that will tell us the angle that's on the inside, which in this case is 30 degrees. And then I just have to figure out the rest. Well, if that's 30, that means this is 60 up here. Well, now I just have to write in my fractions. So the hypotenuse is always 1. Across from the 30 degrees is 1/2. And across from the 60 degrees is radical 3 over 2. Now, unfortunately, there is no fancy trick for this. And the reason why there's no fancy trick is because tangent is represented by the slope. So if I were to put in the trick for tangent, it's represented by y over x. So there's no fancy trick for us to just flip it over. It's going to be a fraction over a fraction. So tangent and cotangent is kind of annoying because you have to find an LCD in order to simplify it down. So in this case, if we were to do cotangent, cotangent is represented by the adjacent over the opposite. So when I go to create this fraction down here, my adjacent side is going to be radical 3 over 2, because that's the side that's next to the 30 degrees. And the opposite side is going to be represented by 1/2. So this question is actually pretty nice, because if I ask you guys to find the LCD, you guys should notice that you already have the LCD, because it's already 2. And I taught you guys that if the denominator is already the same, you guys could just cross it right off. So this would just be radical 3 over 1, which is really just radical 3. So actually, part B wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because we didn't have to multiply anything out. Okay. So I just have to show you guys how to do one on the calculator, and then we'll call it quits for today. Exercise number 2 says, which of the following is closest to the value of secant of 52? So, if you were to pull up your calculator, you will notice that the only trig functions that are on your calculator right now are sine, cosine, and tangent. There is no secant, there is no cosecant, and there is no cotangent. So the only way you can solve these with the calculator is if you do the reciprocal on paper first and then type it into the calculator. So down here we have secant of 52 degrees. So we don't have secant to type into the calculator. So I'm going to look up top, and we said secant is the same thing as saying 1 over cosine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this as the reciprocal. So if it's a reciprocal, I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm still going to have 52 degrees on the bottom. But instead of writing secant, because it's flipped over, the trig function switches into cosine. So these are the new rules for today. You just have to know when you go to use the calculator, you can't type secant, cosecant, cotangent. You have to do the flip and convert it into its correct form. So up top, secant is the same as the reciprocal of cosine. Well, now that I have this, this can be typed into the calculator. So first thing, please make sure that your calculator is in the correct mode. So because it says 52 degrees, I have to make sure my calculator is in degree mode. So I click the mode button, and if you scroll down, you should notice that I'm in radian right now, and you guys may be in radian as well. So switch it into degree first. Then you can just type it right into the calculator as the fraction we wrote down. So I have 1 over cosine of 52, close my parenthesis, enter. It says it's 1.624, and if you look at those 4 answers, we do have that answer on there. It is answer B. Okay? So that is all I have for you guys today. I know a lot of people didn't show up today. It is a beautiful day out, so I'm going to hope that everybody's going to be watching this on YouTube. Do not be afraid to ask me questions. Technically, this was like the last lesson of this unit. Obviously, we'll finish it up tomorrow. Next week is really going to be like the last week of new material. And then the remaining, I guess, couple weeks. I think that we only have technically 3 weeks of school left. Friday if you have a class, you still have a class. I know it was normally a day off for school. I don't know if you guys got the letter in the mail yet, but Friday we do have school. Monday, the 25th, there is no school. So no teacher will be teaching classes on Monday. And then if you guys didn't get the letter or the phone call, the last day of school for you guys is June 16th, which is a Tuesday. So as I'm looking at the calendar right now, we have next week, we have the first week of June, and then we will have the second week of June, and then we are pretty much done for the school year. So make sure you guys are getting in any assignments that you're missing. I know a lot of you guys have been pretty good about it. A lot of you guys have been like a lesson or two behind, but you're working at your own pace and you're getting them in. So I'm okay with that. I got no issues with that. But make sure you're getting them in. I'm going to probably have to cap off the last day of work as I'm looking at it now, probably June 12th. Because if the 16th is the last day of school for you guys, I need to make sure that I have everything graded before then. So the 12th will most likely be the last day of collection of assignments. So if you are a little bit behind, make sure you're just kind of picking up the pace a little bit, and we'll go from there. But I have faith in all of you guys. I really miss all of you. I'm hoping that we can do something where we can get back up to the school. I don't know if it's going to happen. So I will talk to you guys all soon. Enjoy the beautiful weather today and tomorrow. Tomorrow's supposed to be nice as well. And yeah, I will see you guys for tomorrow's lesson. Have a good one, guys.